polls recently. The SNP have published a poll along with YouGov, a sample size of 1,105 people, which found that 52% of respondents thought that the Scottish Government should be responsible for all tax and spending decisions in Scotland. And on a separate question, 53% thought that Scottish Government would be best at deciding welfare and pensions policy. So, what's the difference between doing this and just making that final little jump to independence? There's still a kind of 20% gap in there. And I find it quite difficult to understand this. What's the difference between just taking all the power and then just going that full step? And just making that last little jump. And what do we need to do to convince people? Is it something emotional? Is it some technical type? Is it something psychological? What do you think, Stuart?
Well, I'm of the opinion that even if you're a Diva Max person and that you believe in, say, federalism of these islands, there's a very strong argument to be made to say to someone that wants that, well, look, the only way you're going to get the kind of federal structure you want, or a Devo Max that you want, is you start off from an independent Scotland. Then you can negotiate your way back into some kind of loose arrangement, because that's the only way you're going to get a good deal. Otherwise, you start from a very poor bargaining position.
Yeah, and Andrew, what do you make of it?
I think it's an interesting one, and it's one which I've had some experience of having arguments with some of my friends, one in particular, and I don't think I've related this story, so I won't apologise for repeating myself ahead of time. But I was chatting to one of my pals down here. He went to school with me up in Glasgow, actually, and he's kind of a bourgeois guy, tends to be a kind of liberal voter, liberal by instinct, would probably be a federalist by sensibility. And he was quite difficult to convince about independence. If you asked him flat out, he'd say, no, I'm not in favour of independence. If you paused a wee bit and said, well, what do you think about this power? Do you think this power should be devolved? Would you prefer that John Swinney should decide over this topic, or would you prefer George Osborne to decide about it? Then more and more, he kind of increasingly came to the view that he thought that all of these decisions should be made by Scottish ministers and the Scottish Parliament, finally. And I think it probably reflects the fact that people haven't fully thought through what is meant by independence. I think people sort of do have quite an emotional reaction to it, either for or against it often, but actually haven't really evaluated the extent to which their own values, if they sit somewhere in the middle, tend towards a more kind of devolutionary, potentially more independent supporting future, given the kind of things that Stuart was talking about, given the actual nature of the choice which confronts folk in 2014. That's sort of my interpretation of it anyway.
Do you think the idea of that if we don't vote for independence, we'll get more devolution, do you think it's very pie in the sky?
It's worse than that. I'm sorry, it's without a doubt. We'll get a repeat of what happened in 79. Oh, without a doubt. I don't think there's any question of it. There's a bitterness down there in Whitehall, Westminster, because we only have leverage when we have the possibility of independence. We can get things out of London and under those terms, but no, if there's a no vote, I'm sorry, it'll be like a desert. It'll be like Ravenscraig all over again.
Yeah, I'm not convinced we'll get much if there's a no vote. I think it's Salmond in his speech today said, in a certain sense, Scotland can't afford to vote no. I think that might be true. I don't expect that we'll be given great budgets or better powers after a no vote. What do you think, Andrew?
I think it depends, actually. I think if you look at the position we're in now, in which none of the pro-UK Together parties, with maybe the exception of the Liberals, but no one, with all fairness to them, should concern themselves too much with what the Liberals think, because they're going to get gubbed in the next election. But neither the Conservatives or the Labour Party really have a very clear prospectus on this. And I think, given what's gone on before, we have a kind of rational basis to be sceptical about whether they'll devolve more powers. I mean, my question is always, well, if the Labour Party and the Conservative Party really believed that the powers in the Scotland Act 1998 and the powers in the post-Calman Scotland Act that they passed were insufficient, why did they do it? I mean, if they were convinced intellectually in principle that Scotland should have more powers, why limit themselves to Calman's proposals? I think it's much more likely that one would say that they don't really believe that these issues should be devolved and actually are responding quite reactively two SNP victories in 2011, unexpected as they were for the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. I don't think particularly that if we lose in 2014, and critically if there's no prospectus from the Conservative or the Labour Party for future devolution, a solid prospectus, not just a kind of pie in the sky prospectus, then I think we're not strengthened. Because I ask this question again: is the prospectus for proportional voting in the UK strengthened or undermined by the crushing defeat of the AV referendum? It's crushingly undermined. There's no prospect of proportional representation in the immediate future in the UK. And I think, therefore, on the basis of the evidence we've got at the moment, there is no convincing prospectus that Labour or Tory will come up with the goods if we vote no in 2014.
Well, look, can I bring up a topic but it's relevant to just about everything we've talked about. But to me, the big problem at the moment if we end up with a no vote, it would be because the strategy of the Yes campaign is yet to be revealed. They've either got a very secret plan, which they're keeping very close to their chest, or they don't have a plan at all. And the big picture, the big thing is, like, I'm a post-Marxist. Well, I had a Marxist university education, and Marxism has had its day to some extent. But Gramsci is still terribly relevant. Culture is everything. And culture is everything. That's what binds these United Kingdom, the United Kingdom together, is the culture that pours out of London from television and radio day in, day out, and the national newspapers. And that's not really been challenged yet by the Yes campaign.
But how would one do that? I mean, what would be the structural mechanisms to challenge that hegemony? Because there doesn't seem to be an obvious.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm going to be, what's the word? Well, let's just say, back in 2007. I approached the guy in charge of the advertising budget for the Scottish Government, went along to St Andrew's House, had a chat to him about how I was involved in community radio at the time, how we could possibly work together and make changes. Blair Jenkins, Broadcasting Commission, I made a presentation to that. And yet, if you recall, that was a huge mistake was made by the Scottish Government. They managed to get the entire Holyrood Parliament to support the idea that there should be a Scottish broadcasting channel, and yet they didn't go ahead and do anything about it. Meanwhile, down in Wales, the Welsh Assembly Government, in the hands of the Labour Party, were doling out money to community radio stations across Wales. An enormous mistake was made by not engaging on the issue of culture, and in particular the power of broadcasting.
But aren't they Stuart, but aren't they two different things? I mean, on one level, I'm pretty sure on the Scotland Act that the SNP and the Scottish Parliament has no power over the regulation of broadcasting, that they can't sort of compel the BBC to do anything about that. I take your point about wider efforts maybe to reach out and foster more local radio, more kind of.
Well, BBC Alabama, I'm sure that more could have been done with that. I went to a presentation before that was set up from the manager of MG Alba. So many mistakes have been made, and it is the power of culture. EastEnders, the pop music, the movies. That's what's going to make an awful lot of people, ordinary people in Scotland, vote no, because that's the world they understand.
I think there's something in that. I mean, one of my favourite things that Chomsky ever said is that people need to realise there's more propaganda in the soap operas than there is in the news.
A very good point.
And it works very well, I suppose, if it's quiet and undetected. It's one of the things, actually, if you take an interest in disability policy, that one of the things that disabled campaigners who are interested in culture were at for years was attempts to sort of foster positive representations on things like EastEnders of sort of folk and real, fully human characters as opposed to caricatures. I don't know, though, to what extent I think that the Scottish Government has much power, the Scottish Parliament has much power to do these kind of things. I'm not sure if these are so much strategic errors as sort of predicaments of circumstance, which it is not within the SNP's and the Yes campaign's power to avoid, to defeat.
Wait a minute, can I just throw in one expression, UDI, right? No, I could have brought this up earlier on. At the announcement of the date, if you follow what Frankly publishes, apparently 7 days before the 18th of September 2014 is the most likely date for the Catalonian regional government to declare UDI. Now, do we possibly face at any point in the future a frustrated Scottish devolved government, nationalist government, declaring UDI?
I don't think so. I mean, that would be intolerable politically, because the SNP's long-standing policy after devolution has been that there would be this referendum lock, and arguably that's what's helped the SNP to prosper and to deliver this referendum in the first place. I don't think I would find it tolerable as a nationalist for the nationalist majority elected by a minority, many of them on the basis of an understanding that there would be a referendum which would govern the solution to this, declaring independence unilaterally. I don't think I could support that at all.
Yeah, it would depend. It surely would depend on the circumstances at the time, because, to be honest, there is a history of even Secret Service involvement, or the Macron report over the years or what was the McRae incident. There is, to a certain extent, there's been some very dirty deeds done in the past against the nationalist movement.
This is true, and there's a great BBC Alba documentary about that. But I think with the UDI, I mean, you could only support that if they actually had the referendum, won it convincingly, and then were denied independence. That's a different situation, though.
That's true, but perhaps I'll just go back to my point, is that frankly suggested that the 18th, well, in fact, on the 11th of September 2014, the Catalonian regional government is likely to declare UDI.
It's very interesting stuff. But I think we'll just take one more little topic, because Andrew spoke about media power and errors. And this was the Better Together this week. Did you see the media power error when they tried to get the video banned?
What fun we had.
And it went mental. It went viral very, very quickly. And I think I know what my tune's going to be for going out on this episode, because I think the Better Together campaign just realised what the Streisand effect is.
Yes. Oh, so it's going to be Barbara, is it?
It'll have to be, and I'm apologising for this in advance. It's not because we like Barbara Streisand.
I mean, I thought it was actually a rather nice little video, and it does exemplify the extent to which the kind of folk, grassrootsy folk that come up with these kind of material and publish them out on the internet actually can have a big impact on this campaign. I mean, I think there's a lot of, what I might describe as new media bollocks surrounding the sort of Yes Scotlandy and Better Together campaigns, which sort of have these Obama-esque visions of social media, which I think are largely fantastical and are largely a way of trying to seem modern and edgy rather than convincing ways of convincing people. But I like this image of ordinary citizens gathering together, using their skills, using their savvy on the internet and with these videos to kind of make a bit of an impact. And I think it's the National Collective were saying that the video itself has been viewed by something in the region of 500,000 people. I hope that's not an overstatement, but that's quite a substantial viewing, even if
it wouldn't have gone there if it hadn't been brought down by the Better Together campaign, would it?
Well, that's the interesting question. Why do you think they tried to bring that down? I mean, I think it was officially done with a copyright claim because they used a couple of seconds of Better Together video. But I mean, are they really that worried about protecting their copyright for their video? I mean, can that really be the reason that annoyed them? That video? Why did they want that taken down? That's the interesting question. Obviously, I think I'm conjecturing, but I think they just didn't like the video.
Well, can I just? I will throw one last media culture Better Together thing in. Apparently, the other night, on the Thursday night after the announcement, I didn't see it, but Gordon Brewer's Newsnext programme, the backdrop was a Union Jack and the Better Together logo. And that was the entire backdrop. I mean, we know it's a state broadcaster, but I mean, surely they should make an effort.
I don't know. I kind of want to defend the BBC against some of these allegations because it's the role of journalists, whatever the colour of their tie, and Gordon Brewer was wearing a very fetching Union Jack coloured tie. They're not a Union Jack tie, I should say. But it's their duty to kind of put these things to the interrogation. And it may be that they overexpose government ministers and the SNP to difficult questions, because there are difficult questions to answer about independence. But I think it's too easy to get too hung up on these little signals, because it's not going to it's not going to fundamentally have an impact on the campaign, that kind of thing, I don't think. It's not where we're going to win it. We're not going to win it in terms of the media, so we have